Imagine someone walks into your office today, right? And they just drop a small metal plate on your desk.
Okay, just a random plate.
Yeah. And they say, by the way, this is a casual teleporter. It just instantly beams your coffee up from the cafe downstairs. Don't even worry about how it works.
I mean, I would take that deal. That sounds amazing.
Right. But it would be jarring. It would feel fundamentally alien. And that is exactly how jarring it was in 1984 when a beige plastic box suddenly started listening to human voices.
And actually obeying them.
Exactly, obeying them.
You're taking this concept that had existed purely in the realm of speculative science fiction for decades, right? And casually installing it next to a Rolodex.
It's just sitting there on a desk. And welcome to today's deep dive, by the way. We are looking at a review from the November 1984 issue of Personal Computer World magazine.
Written by Martin Banks.
Yeah, Martin Banks. He got his hands on a piece of hardware that was honestly weighing heavily on the public consciousness that specific year.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we are talking about the literal year, 1984.
Right. So George Orwell's novel was everywhere. It was on everyone's mind.
And specifically, his concept of the Speakwrite.
Right. The machine you just talked to and it documents your words. That Orwellian concept was suddenly sitting in front of people.
And the timing of this review is just critical context for you to understand. Because the tech world in late 1984 was in this frantic, completely chaotic transitional phase.
Yeah, everything was up in the air.
The standard QWERTY keyboard, which has dominated since the era of mechanical typewriters, was suddenly facing this existential threat. The industry called them alternative inputs.
Everybody was just throwing things at the wall to see what stuck.
Exactly. Companies were heavily promoting the computer mouse, which, we have to remember, was still a highly controversial, strange little peripheral to most people.
People hated it at first. Like, what is this soap on a wire?
Right. And there were even early rudimentary touchscreens trying to find a foothold. Just wild stuff.
But while all that loud marketing was happening for mice and screens, creeping up completely unawares, as Banks puts it in his review, was the ultimate natural alternative.
Speech. The ability to simply talk to a machine.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to tear apart the mechanics and the psychology of how that actually happened. We are diving into Texas Instruments' highly exclusive, totally wildly expensive speech command system.
It is such a fascinating piece of tech.
We want to figure out how this incredibly clunky, incredibly weird machine laid the unseen groundwork for the modern voice assistants you use every single day.
Because it's really a story of contradictions. You have this massive corporate juggernaut building an elite executive status symbol.
Basically a toy for rich guys.
But in doing so, they unexpectedly championed the cause of accessibility technology long before the tech industry ever considered accessibility a mainstream focus.
And the piece of this that I find most compelling, honestly, is the contrast between how this device was marketed and what it was actually doing computationally.
Oh, the math behind it is staggering.
Because we take Siri or Alexa completely for granted today. You yell across the room to set a timer while you're cooking, and it just happens.
You don't even look at the device.
Right. But getting a machine with the processing power of a 1980s microcomputer to simply acknowledge that a human voice has occurred, let alone parse that audio into actionable data, it required engineering workarounds that border on modern alchemy.
It really does. And to appreciate the scale of that engineering, we have to look at the target audience.
The people buying it.
Yeah, the level of research and development required to make a computer parse human speech in 1984 was astronomically expensive.
Which meant the final product could not be aimed at the average consumer, or even the average small business.
No, the speech command system wasn't even a standalone computer. You couldn't just walk into a store, buy it, and plug it in.
It was an add-on.
Just a peripheral, yeah. You got a circuit board that you had to physically install, a microphone, a headset, and some proprietary software.
And the gatekeeping was severe. You could only use this hardware if you already owned the top-of-the-range Texas Instruments professional computer.
Which is already a significant capital investment on its own.
Huge. And then you add the cost of this specific speech add-on, which Banks notes was 1,300 British pounds.
In 1984.
Right. Let's adjust that for inflation to today's money. You are looking at approximately 5,424 pounds.
Over $5,000.
Over $5,000. For a circuit board, a headset, and some floppy disks.
For a peripheral. I mean, you are spending the equivalent of a modern used car on a peripheral.
It's mind-blowing. And what baffles me is how Texas Instruments handled the marketing of a product this premium.
It's so weird.
Right. If you build a 5,000-pound add-on that literally brings science fiction to life, you would expect full-page newspaper spreads, television spots, massive keynote presentations.
But Banks notes they released it completely under the radar,
Yeah, he explicitly attributes this to Texan conservatism.
which is such a funny phrase. He describes it as a natural state of mind for Texans, which precluded making too much ballyhoo about the speech system.
Just keeping it low-key. Compare that to what else was happening in 1984. Apple had just run its massive, highly theatrical 1984 Super Bowl commercial for the Macintosh.
The woman throwing the sledgehammer.
Exactly. The industry standard for tech marketing was rapidly becoming bombastic, aggressive, completely cinematic.
And Texas Instruments just went the exact opposite direction. They took this quiet, highly conservative corporate route.
But I guess that quiet release strategy tells us exactly who they were targeting.
Right, they weren't trying to convince the masses that the future had arrived. They were targeting the corporate elite.
This high price tag naturally positioned the speech command system as the ultimate executive status symbol.
Because the 1980s corporate pecking order was heavily defined by what was physically on your desk.
Having a computer at all meant you were important.
Yeah, but having an add-on that cost more than the entire computer sitting on your subordinate's desk, that was a massive flex.
It sent a very clear message that your time, and quite literally your voice, was highly valued by the corporation.
And the review actually paints a highly specific, almost cinematic picture of the intended use case. Banks asks the reader to imagine the harassed executive.
Oh, right, the harassed executive.
Yeah, the scenario is an executive sitting at his desk, dictating numbers out loud into a Lotus 123 spreadsheet by talking to his computer while simultaneously scribbling physical notes by hand on a legal pad.
Okay, see, I am extremely skeptical of this harassed executive fantasy.
We don't buy it.
Not at all. Was this actually about productivity? Did a senior executive genuinely want to sit in the middle of an open-plan office wearing a bulky headset shouting 472 at a glowing cathode ray tube screen while a dozen other people were trying to make phone calls?
I mean, it sounds like a nightmare.
It sounds less like a productivity hack and more like the 1980s equivalent of wearing a flashy, oversized luxury watch just to prove you can afford it.
Well, your skepticism is warranted. Banks actually addresses the open-plan office problem directly in the text.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he notes that the headset option was useful precisely because it prevented the machine's auditory responses from disturbing everyone else in the room.
Oh, so the machine is talking back to you.
Exactly. But in its early stages, the ultimate status symbol of the corporate pecking order was likely its primary marketplace. It was an incredibly expensive novelty for the very rich and the very busy.
Basically an executive toy. And this is the fascinating part. This wasn't just corporate snake oil.
No, not at all.
The underlying technology was mathematically and computationally brilliant.
It really was.
They didn't just invent this voice architecture out of thin air for the boardroom. They adapted it from an incredibly unexpected place.
A beloved children's educational toy.
Yeah, which is just crazy to think about.
Texas Instruments was actually in a very unique position here. They had arguably played the most significant role of any tech company in developing commercial speech synthesis.
Because of the Speak and Spell.
Yes. They had introduced the Speak and Spell toy years earlier.
That bright orange plastic toy with the handle? The one that taught kids how to spell by speaking words out loud in that creepy robotic voice.
That's the one. And developing the Speak and Spell forced Texas Instruments to solve a massive foundational problem in computer science.
Which was what?
How do you put human-sounding speech onto a microchip when memory space is practically non-existent?
Because in the late 1970s and early 1980s, memory wasn't just expensive, it was physically bulky.
You couldn't just record a WAV file or an MP3. The storage constraints of the era are actually quite difficult to conceptualize today.
Give us an example.
So Banks mentions in his review that a 10-megabyte hard drive, which, by the way, was considered a massive enterprise-grade storage capacity in 1984, could hold about 4 hours of continuous speech if it was stored as one giant uncompressed file.
Think about that for a second. 10 megabytes. Today, if you take a single high-resolution photograph on your phone, it might be 10 megabytes.
And you have thousands of them in your pocket.
Right. But in 1984, 10 megabytes was a heavy metal box that sat on your desk, whirring loudly, and it maxed out at 4 hours of audio.
Because normal digitized speech at the time required about 30 kilobytes of storage for every single second of audio.
30 kilobytes a second.
Yeah, and it was entirely unsustainable for a microcomputer to handle any meaningful vocabulary at that data rate.
So, to make this 1,300-pound executive system work, Texas Instruments utilized the fundamental technology they had pioneered for the speak and spell.
Right. It's called linear predictive coding, or LPC,
Linear predictive coding.
which functioned as a highly advanced form of early audio compression. It took that massive storage requirement of 30 kilobytes per second and crushed it down to just 12 kilobytes per second.
Less than half.
Significantly less.
So let's break down the mechanism of LPC because it is brilliant. When you think about compressing data today, you usually think about just stripping away quality.
Like making a JPEG blurrier so the file size is smaller?
Right, but LPC doesn't do that.
No, it takes a totally different approach. Instead of recording a digital video of a pianist playing a song, which is essentially what a standard audio waveform is, right? A heavy, exact replica of the sound wave LPC just records the sheet music.
It captures which keys were pressed, how hard, and for how long.
Exactly. It sends that lightweight sheet music to the computer, which then plays a digital piano on the other end to recreate the music.
But applied to the human voice.
Right, because human speech is produced by two main components. You have the sound source, which is your vocal cords vibrating.
Okay.
And you have the filter, which is the physical shape of your vocal tract, your throat, your tongue, your lips. LPC mathematically models that physical filter.
So it doesn't record a dumb audio wave of someone talking?
No. It analyzes the speech as it happens, calculates the mathematical parameters of the vocal tract that produce that specific sound, and stores those parameters.
That is so smart. Real speech was recorded as discrete words and phrases, and this technique meant that each modeled word was stored at a specific address in the computer's memory.
So when the speech command system needed to speak back to the user, it wasn't playing back a tape recording.
It wasn't just hitting play on a cassette.
No, it was simply constructing the speech from scratch by calling out those memory addresses in the correct sequence. It fed the mathematical model back through a synthesizer chip.
It's rebuilding the voice on the fly. It's like freeze-dried coffee.
Freeze-dried coffee.
Yeah, you take this massive, heavy liquid thing, strip it down to its absolute bare essentials so it can be stored easily on a shelf, and then you just instantly rehydrate it with water when you call upon it.
That is a perfect analogy. You are just rehydrating the math.
And it fundamentally solves the storage crisis.
But it also unlocked incredible performance capabilities. Because the files were so mathematically structured and small, the machine could record the spoken word as fast as the user could say it and then instantly play it straight back without any lag.
Which Banks was genuinely stunned by. He writes that it had a fidelity approaching that of audio cassette recorders.
That is incredibly high praise for a microcomputer in 1984.
And the fidelity of that LPC model led to the most impressive feature of their dictation file utility.
Oh, this is the best part.
Because the system was mathematically modeling the speech rather than playing a static audio wave, users could manipulate the playback in ways that seemed like literal magic at the time.
You could play back the audio faster, slower, louder, or quieter, completely independently.
Meaning you could speed up a voice without the pitch changing.
You avoid the chipmunk effect.
Right. If you take a standard cassette tape and play it at double speed, the frequency doubles, and the person sounds like Mickey Mouse.
But Banks gives this incredible anecdote in the review to test the TI system.
I love this part.
He took the microphone, held it up to a portable radio, and recorded a portion of a test match cricket commentary.
He specifically notes he recorded the legendary BBC commentator Christopher Martin Jenkins.
Right. So he records Martin Jenkins calling the cricket match. Then he uses the TI computer to speed up the playback.
And what happens?
He notes that the voice remained perfectly recognizable. It didn't distort into a high-pitched squeal. It was just Christopher Martin Jenkins speaking impossibly fast.
Banks actually wrote, "You never knew you could talk that fast."
That anecdote perfectly illustrates the power of linear predictive coding. The computer wasn't squishing and stretching audio tape. It was taking the stored mathematical model of his vocal tract and simply telling the synthesizer to reconstruct that model at a faster tempo.
It's just a massive audio engineering triumph. The back-end compression is brilliant, the storage problem is solved, the audio sounds clear and doesn't warp when you speed it up.
It sounds flawless.
On a technical specification sheet, it is flawless. But the reality of sitting down in a chair and actually trying to use this technology to do a job was a very, very different story.
Oh, yeah. This is where we hit the absolute brick wall of 1984 user experience design.
The UX was rough. Texas Instruments proudly called their interface the transparent keyboard.
Which is such a bold claim.
The marketing implication is that you just talk, and the computer seamlessly understands as if an invisible keyboard is typing your words.
The word transparent was doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
A colossal amount of heavy lifting, because let's walk through what the actual human experience of using this transparent keyboard required. You couldn't just boot up the machine and say, center this text.
No, you had to manually, painstakingly map specific spoken phrases to very specific keystrokes.
It demanded a deep operational knowledge of the software you were using. You had to know the exact keyboard macros for every action you wanted to automate.
Let's use WordStar as an example.
Okay. Which was one of the dominant word processors of the era.
Right. If you wanted to center a line of text in WordStar, you didn't click a button with your mouse.
No mice.
The keyboard command was holding the CTRL key and then hitting the letters O and C.
CTRLOC.
So the user had to open the speech command interface and explicitly tell the system, look, when I speak the phrase center text into this microphone, I need you to trick the computer into thinking I just physically typed the sequence CTRLOC.
You had to program this translation for every single command, and you were operating under severe memory constraints.
Extremely severe. Vocabularies were strictly restricted to a maximum of 50 words or phrases per file.
50 active commands, that's it.
You could have up to 9 distinct vocabulary saved on the system, giving you a total library of 450 words.
But for any given active task, you only had those 50 phrases loaded into the system's memory.
So our harassed executive isn't speaking naturally to his computer. He is navigating a highly constrained, artificially constructed language of his own design.
Shifting between tiny vocabulary files depending on whether he's in a spreadsheet or a word processor.
And before you could even use those 50 words, you had to train the computer to recognize your specific voice.
Right, you had to enroll your voice print because the machine had no baseline understanding of the English language.
Zero. It only knew the acoustic patterns you explicitly fed into it.
And the enrollment process was grueling. The system would prompt you on the screen, it would highlight a word you had mapped, and you had to say it.
Texas Instruments recommended you say each word a minimum of 3 times and up to a maximum of 9 times.
9 times per word.
Because the system is trying to build a statistical model of how your specific vocal tract pronounces that specific phone.
And the machine judged you. It gave you a color-coded grade and a rating out of 10 after you spoke.
Brutal.
If the text turned red, your recognition was poor. Yellow meant reasonable. Green meant good.
Picture the executive who just spent 5,000 pounds on a status symbol. He is sitting in his open plan office wearing a headset, staring at a screen, and saying the word calculate, calculate, calculate over and over again, trying to get the machine to give him green light.
It's an incredibly humbling process. But let's say you get through it. You have your green lights. You've mapped your 50 words.
Okay.
To actually apply this vocabulary, you had to navigate back to the MS-DOS operating system and run a specific utility program to activate the voice listener.
The infamous program. TPK setup.
TPKSCTUP.
Okay.
Now, we need to explain what running this actually meant mechanically, because early DOS did not work like modern Windows or Mac OS.
Oh, MS-DOS was a single-tasking operating system. It could only do one thing at a time. It could run WordStar, or it could run a voice recognition program. It could not natively run both simultaneously.
So wait, how on earth does the voice command actually get into WordStar?
Through what's called a keyboard interrupt program, specifically a terminate and stay resident program, or TSR.
Okay, TSR.
When you ran TPK setup, the program loaded itself into the computer's memory and then ostensibly closed, returning you to the DOS prompt so you could load your word processor. But it was actually still lurking in the background memory.
Just waiting for a signal from the microphone.
Precisely. When the hardware detected a recognized voice command, the TSR program would literally send an interrupt signal to the computer's central processor.
It basically pauses the computer.
It halts whatever WordStar is doing for a fraction of a second, injects the mapped fake keystrokes like CTRLOC directly into the computer's keyboard buffer, and then hands control back to WordStar.
That is wild. WordStar processes the keystrokes as if a ghost just typed them on the physical keyboard.
It's an incredibly clever hack.
But TPK setup had a notorious, infuriating quirk.
It was a menu-based configuration program, and it suffered from an endless loop.
Oh, I hate those.
Yeah.
When you finished configuring your settings in TPK setup, you would naturally try to exit back to DOS, right?
Sure.
But the menu would just cycle. It would show you the same configuration options over and over again. It completely trapped the user.
A classic hallmark of poorly programmed exit conditions in early DOS utilities.
Banks notes that you were trapped in this menu loop until you finally deduced that the only way to escape the program was to manually type the word QUIT on the keyboard.
The irony is rich.
Right. To activate the system that prevents you from having to use the keyboard, you are forced to manually type a command to escape its own setup menu.
It's hilarious. But, the setup loops and the vocabulary limits pale in comparison to the psychological friction of actually using the system in real time.
Oh, definitely.
Banks points out a massive, fundamental flaw that emerged once he started talking to the machine. He calls it the need for circumspection in pronunciation.
Circumspection in pronunciation, which is a very polite, diplomatic way of stating a brutal truth. The user had to talk like a robot.
They absolutely did. Because the system operated entirely by comparing your live microphone input with the stored LPC voice print you recorded during that grueling enrollment process.
The one you did 9 times.
Right. If the live audio matched the stored mathematical model, the interrupt fired the keystroke.
Therefore, the system demanded a remarkably high degree of consistency. If the live input deviated from the stored model, the comparison failed, and the machine did nothing.
And the problem is that human speech is entirely inconsistent. We do not speak in static, identical waveforms.
No, human speech is layered with inflection, emotion, fatigue, sinus congestion. Banks explicitly notes in the review that human speech and inflection is not always as constant as it might be.
If that executive using this system got stressed out, or if he was tired at the end of a long day, or if his inflection changed even slightly because he was distracted, the machine suddenly stopped recognizing his commands.
The machine would literally refuse to recognize a command that it had perfectly understood and executed just a few minutes earlier, simply because the user's emotional state altered the shape of their vocal tract slightly.
Think about the mental load this placed on the user. You are trying to do your job.
Right.
You are mentally juggling exactly which 50 words you mapped for this specific spreadsheet. You are trying to remember if the command to save the file was mapped to save document or just save.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
And while you are performing these mental gymnastics, you are simultaneously forcing yourself to mask all human emotion from your voice.
Because if you sound frustrated that the machine isn't working, your voice tightens, the pitch shifts.
And it creates a vicious cycle. The machine misses a command, you get slightly annoyed, you repeat the command, but now there is tension in your voice.
The computer analyzes this new, tense voice print, compares it to the relaxed voice print you recorded during enrollment, and determines there is no match.
It ignores you again. You get angrier.
The angrier you get, the less the machine understands you. It demands absolute, unfeeling consistency.
Which is the grand, tragic irony of early voice computing. The entire goal of these tech companies was to make machines sound more human.
Right. They used linear predictive coding to avoid the mechanical chipmunk effect. They built upon the speak and spell lineage to create systems with tolerably human-like synthetic speech.
They wanted to eliminate the robotic monotone from the computer.
And to achieve that, they ended up requiring the human users to speak in a flat, unvarying, unfeeling monotone just to be understood. The human had to become a robot to talk to the machine.
It's completely backward.
It is. And you can see why this didn't immediately replace the mouse or the keyboard. It's incredibly easy for us, sitting here decades later, to just laugh at the image of a harassed 1980s executive shouting at his Lotus spreadsheet in a forced monotone voice, completely trapped in an MS-DOS menu loop.
It sounds like a sketch comedy routine.
It really does. But this is where Martin Banks's review takes a profound turn, and it's why this specific piece of source material is so important for us to dive into today. Banks saw past all the corporate gimmickry.
He saw past the frustration of the inflection matching failures.
While frustrated executives might have shoved their 1,300-pound headsets into a desk drawer and gone back to typing, Banks realized what the underlying technology actually represented.
Yeah, he reaches the conclusion of his review, and he explicitly states that it is incredibly easy to dismiss the speech command system as an executive's plaything.
He openly acknowledges that it is being marketed as the ultimate status symbol in the corporate pecking order.
But then he argues that it offers facilities of considerable value that go far beyond the gimmick of driving a spreadsheet by voice.
He identifies a genuine, life-changing accessibility breakthrough.
He looks at that system of 450 words, the 9 vocabularies of 50 words each, To an executive who just wants to dictate a memo naturally, 450 constrained words is a frustrating limitation.
It's useless to them.
Right. But Banks realizes that those 450 words could be carefully, thoughtfully grouped together to create a simple but fully functional, hands-free interface.
He explicitly names the target demographic for this realization. He writes that the technology could be brought together in a word processing system specifically for those who cannot use their hands.
For disabled individuals.
We really have to contextualize this. This is 1984. This is years before the Americans with Disabilities Act in the United States.
Exactly. This is an era before accessibility was a standardized, mandatory metric in software design. The concept of assistive technology as a core pillar of personal computing barely existed.
The interface of the personal computer was entirely predicated on fine motor control. You were typing on a keyboard or meticulously moving a physical mouse to navigate a screen.
If you lacked that motor control, the digital revolution was largely locked away from you.
And here's a tech journalist looking at an overpriced, incredibly frustrating corporate status symbol and realizing, wait, this exact architecture with all its flaws is going to liberate people who physically cannot type.
The transparent keyboard wasn't just a party trick. It was a bypass for physical limitations.
Which is just a beautiful realization. It beautifully highlights the broader trajectory of how monumental technological breakthroughs often occur.
To engineer something as complex as linear predictive coding, and to design hardware capable of real-time voice recognition and MS-DOS interrupt injection that required a massive research and development budget.
It required the deep pockets of a massive corporation like Texas Instruments.
And to justify that R&D spend, they had to target a demographic willing to pay an exorbitant premium. They had to target wealthy executives.
The executives' desire for a shiny new desk flex essentially funded the foundational research.
The corporate status symbol was merely the financial vehicle.
Right. But the lasting moral value of the technology wasn't in helping a middle manager update a spreadsheet 3 seconds faster. The true value was in accessibility.
And Banks's foresight wasn't limited just to word processing. He also looked at the networking capabilities of the system and predicted entirely new modes of communication.
The text mentions that Texas Instruments was introducing a local area network system for their professional computer line. And Banks theorizes about taking those highly compressed LPC voice files and appending them directly to electronic mail.
He predicted the voice note.
In 1984.
Long before smartphones, long before WhatsApp audio messages. He says there is no reason why a file of recorded speech couldn't offer the recipient help, comfort, or advice of a verbal nature.
It's an incredibly humanistic view of the technology. When Banks actually asked the Texas Instruments executives about this specific application, about using the system for accessibility and verbal email communication, he notes that they just smiled sweetly and refused to speculate on future products.
They likely hadn't even fully grasped the paradigm shift their own hardware was capable of facilitating. They were still focused on selling it as a calculator alternative for the boardroom.
But the lineage from this 1,300-pound add-on to the technology we rely on today is direct and unbroken.
It absolutely is.
If you are listening to this right now, think about how often you rely on voice commands. Every time you dictate a text message while your hands are on the steering wheel.
Every time you use a smart speaker to set a kitchen timer because your hands are covered in flour.
Exactly. And every accessibility feature built into modern operating systems that allows full navigation via voice features that empower millions of people with physical disabilities to interact with the digital world with complete autonomy traces its DNA back to the concept of the transparent keyboard mapping spoken words to macros.
We owe a massive debt of gratitude to that clunky, prohibitively expensive Texas Instruments system that forced people to repeat the same word 9 times until a tiny screen turned green.
It was the necessary, clumsy first step toward democratizing the interface.
It really was.
So let's take a step back and look at the whole picture of what we've uncovered today. We started with an impossibly expensive piece of hardware, an add-on for the TI professional computer, released quietly into the 1984 corporate ecosystem, wrapped in Texan conservatism.
We traced its engineering lineage back to the bright orange plastic shell of the Speak and Spell, which gave the world linear predictive coding.
A mathematical breakthrough that compressed audio by modeling the human vocal tract like sheet music, saving precious megabytes of storage and allowing a cricket commentator to speak at double speed without turning into a chipmunk.
We examined the harsh reality of the 1984 user experience, the endless loops of the TPK sets menu, the intricacies of MS-DOS keyboard interrupts, and the strict 50-word vocabulary limits.
And we explored the profound realization that despite being marketed as an executive plaything, voice technology's true calling was in breaking down the barriers of human accessibility.
Reading Martin Banks's review is a perfect reminder that the future rarely arrives in a sleek, flawless package. It usually sneaks onto a desk in an imperfect, highly expensive, and deeply frustrating form, long before it becomes democratized, refined, and completely invisible in our daily lives.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with, something to mull over after you finish listening. In 1984, the Texas Instruments system failed to be a mass market hit, largely because it couldn't handle the reality of human emotion. The illusion of the transparent keyboard shattered the moment a user's voice showed stress, fatigue, or frustration.
The machine demanded absolute robotic perfection from the human.
It was a machine that fundamentally failed to compute the human element. But now, look at the trajectory of today's artificial intelligence. Our modern voice technology perfectly understands the words we say, regardless of our accent, our pitch, or our frustration.
Yeah, just get it.
But as AI models continue to rapidly evolve, they are moving beyond simple word recognition into sentiment analysis. What happens when our technology starts successfully reading and reacting to that exact stress, frustration, or sadness in our voices that so thoroughly confused machines of 1984?
When the machine knows exactly how you are feeling.
Right. When your computer doesn't just know what command you issued, but exactly how anxious or angry you felt when you issued it. Will we still want to talk to these devices when they know us that intimately? Or will we find ourselves wishing for a dumb, simple machine that just beams us our coffee and doesn't try to analyze how we're doing?
That is a wild thought.
Something to think about the next time you sigh in frustration before asking your digital assistant for the weather. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.